Over the weekend, I did an AMA. One of the people who responded was someone who's been involved in prison ministry before. They mentioned that they wished the prison systems focused more on education and rehabilitation. As a current inmate, I wanted to dive into that subject a little bit further. Before I start, I want to explain that I'm not referring to each prison system individually within the United States of America. I'm speaking on the system as a whole. I keep up with information about prisons from multiple states. I'm not an expert by any means, but after serving over a decade behind bars, plus keeping up with news reports, talking to inmates from other states, and browsing online, I definitely have some knowledge on the subject. If you keep up with what's going on behind bars in any way, you know it's no secret that the United States justice system as a whole isn't very rehabilitative. You could say it's a well-oiled machine, though. We're damn good at taking people off the streets and locking them up for years. I told my bunkmate recently that in our state, they could literally release every single inmate today, and I'm confident there are enough people sitting in the jails waiting to be sent to prison that they could refill the prisons almost to full capacity the next day. The jail I was at had a 2 to 3 week waiting period from sentencing to when you're shipped to the diagnostic prison. There, they screen you for physical or mental health issues, classify you, and in about 1 to 90 days, send you to the prison where you officially start your sentence. For those who don't know, yes, you get credit for time served in prison, and usually the time in jail before you're sent to the prison where you become what we call a permanent at. Now, before I really get into education and rehabilitation, I want to tell you something interesting I've noticed over the years. People say it's not nice to judge others, and a lot claim they never do. But in reality, we all do it to some degree. The difference is that people who never judge treat everyone pretty much the same and don't play favorites. So I'm sure we've all seen someone's actions and thought, it's only a matter of time before they end up in jail. It's pretty obvious from what a person does, whether, if they get caught, they're headed to jail or prison. Well, in here, I see guys all the time doing things that give me that same gut feeling. If they get released, it's only a matter of time before they come back. Over the years, I've watched several inmates return to the exact same prison or jail I was at. I saw one guy get out of jail and come back 3 times in 6 months. Another was released from prison, arrested at Walmart within hours, released from jail a day or so later, and then, according to a friend of his who was in here with me, got arrested again within a week of leaving prison. I've heard of and even looked up others who got out and were right back in prison or jail within a few months. These guys have served anywhere from 1 year to decades. What most of them have in common is a long criminal record. They've been in and out of jails and prisons most of their lives. That's made me think the justice system puts some real consideration into sentence length, but it's not always about rehabilitation. Like, maybe this much time will teach the offender a lesson and deter them from crime. No, I honestly believe that if they see someone who'll keep coming back over and over, they let that person out sooner with shorter sentences or earlier parole than someone they think will be a one-and-done offender. That doesn't mean they're releasing murderers or extremely violent people early or often. No, I think most people who seriously injured or killed someone spend a long time behind bars, or the rest of their lives. So my conclusion is, if they think you'll keep recycling through the system, they give you shorter time to keep the arrest numbers looking good. You're probably asking why they do that. Numbers. At the end of the year, and sometimes during, they publish reports. We took this many new criminals off the streets, plus this many who reoffended. The public sees those numbers and thinks, wow, they're doing a great job keeping us safe. What the public doesn't see is Joe Smith, who's been on the last 5 reports for consecutive years. 5 years ago, he was an 18-year-old high school dropout, finally charged as an adult for the same kind of crime he'd started around age 11. Joe began stealing from neighbors' garages as a kid. By 15, he was selling drugs at school and on the streets. The only reason he made it to 10th grade was that he had a good clientele of customers at school. It was easier to sell to several kids out of 1,500 than to roam the streets handling one customer at a time. He could slip into a bathroom and sell to 5 people at once. After getting expelled and charged as a minor for drug possession and distribution, he went full-time on the streets. The average citizen sees those end-of-year arrest reports and doesn't know the story behind the countless Joes in them. On the surface, the report looks great. The system seems to be working, and life goes on. The only people who really see the failures are Joe's family, his friends, and those who knew him well. They see there's a problem, even if they don't know how to fix it. Just like a smoking car engine tells you something's wrong, even if you're not a mechanic. So let's talk about education and rehabilitation in the prison system, or the system as a whole. Often, even before trial, someone could be offered rehabilitative measures that actually help them change their ways and actions. Maybe they wouldn't even need a long prison sentence just to learn their lesson. After all, the point of learning is to make better choices down the road. If an offender does some pre-trial programs and truly seems rehabilitated, a lot of good can come from it. I'm gonna use Joe here as an example. He ain't real, just a stand-in for the kind of guy I see every day. Maybe Joe takes drug awareness classes and is required to get his GED, plus a trade school diploma. The judge gives him the choice: complete pre-trial rehabilitation or get sentenced. Joe takes the offer because obviously nobody wants to go to prison. While going through the requirements, he meets several mothers who speak at the drug classes about their sons who died from drug use. Joe didn't know those young men personally, but hearing the mothers talk showed him a side of drug dealing he'd never considered. Joe isn't heartless, so he started thinking maybe he'd supply drugs to someone whose family was now grieving, just like these mothers. He decided the money was good and the work easy, but it wasn't the life for him. Not just because he didn't want prison, but because he didn't want to be the reason someone lost their child and lived in pain. The problem was, what's a high school dropout going to do to survive in the real world? He didn't know yet, but he was about to find out. He started GED classes, sure he'd fail again, just like everyone had always told him he would, and that failure would land him in prison anyway. What actually happened is Joe passed his GED with flying colors. He had a teacher who took the time to explain math and writing, the two subjects he struggled with the most. Joe realized he wasn't dumb like everyone said, and like he'd convinced himself he was. He realized he'd been too focused on selling drugs and street life to pay attention in grade school. If he'd actually tried back then, he would have gathered enough credits and graduated without a doubt, probably even with honors. Joe signed up for trade school with a whole new attitude. He was certain that if he just focused on the classes and training, he could come out with a trade that paid the same or more than drug dealing ever did. Except this time, it was a real career he didn't have to worry about getting arrested for. Joe passed welding class and got hired by a company that makes parts for NASA. When it was time for his pre-trial court appearance, the judge saw he'd completed everything required. The judge also heard from Joe's supervisor, who testified that day. The supervisor said he was shocked this young man had grown up selling drugs and stealing as a teen. Now Joe was foreman over 15 people in a high-production, highly classified section. The supervisor said he'd never seen anyone so young gain skills and work ethic that fast, which is why the company promoted him so quickly. He helped keep their reputation strong for decades. Losing Joe would hurt the company badly. Plus, he'd be leaving behind a loving wife he met in trade school and their 6-month-old son. The supervisor said he wasn't wishing prison on anyone, but if the judge sent Joe away now, it would likely just continue the cycle Joe and his father had been stuck in. Joe had clearly changed, no sign he'd go back to the old life, and he was now the kind of person we all want in our communities, families, and workplaces. The judge dismissed all the charges. Joe now has 3 children, 5 grandkids, a loving wife, and he's CEO at the same company. He plans to retire in the next 3 to 5 years. His name stopped showing up on those arrest lists year after year, but so many others keep recycling. There are also so many who could actually turn it around and stay out if the system gave them half a real shot at education and rehabilitation instead of just filling beds.